Over the past couple of years, I've done a ton of console mods, both here on the channel and before I started my YouTube channel. So I wanted to take a quick trip down memory lane and make a tier list of all the mods that I've done. I spent way too much time making a mod tier list here in Photoshop. I have 24 images here, just 24 different console mods that I've done. I'm going to put them on here in the tier list and see where they kind of stack up. Up first is the Model 1 Genesis triple bypass. Now, of the two different triple bypasses that I've done, I definitely think that the Model 1 is a little bit worse. Even though the Model 1, you definitely do get all three benefits of the triple bypass. You get the Model 2 mini DIN and the RGB bypass and the audio triple bypass, but you have to lift some pins and it's just a general pain in the butt versus the Model 2. This is going to fit squarely into C tier for now. Next is the Model 2 triple bypass. Now, I think this one is a little bit easier. I don't think you have to do as much work to install the triple bypass here. You don't have to install a new DIN. And I just like the look of the Model 2 console better than the Model 1 console. So while this mod still is a pain in the butt to do, it's going to be in B tier, just right above the Model 1. Next, we have a GameCube mod. This is the DOL 101 digital port mod. Now, I did this for a friend, so I don't have this console anymore, but the DOL 101 doesn't have the digital port, so this kind of wipes out the analog port and puts a digital port in there. I do have to say that this mod was actually kind of fun. There's a part where you have to cut the shield, and I used the Dremel to cut the shield, and that was really kind of exciting in terms of video editing. I thought I had a lot of fun with that part. So pretty simple mod, and I guess it's kind of useful because it allows you to use things like the HDMI adapters. Yeah, I think it's gonna go in B tier for now. Okay, next we have the Saturn, FRAM, and Fenrir mods that I've done. The Fenrir isn't necessarily a mod, it's really kind of plug and play, or I guess you do have to screw together. I had the Laser Bear mount for that too, so but the FRAM mod was actually kind of interesting because that was the first time I'd done a hot air rework based mod, I would say, on the channel. Getting more experience with hot air stations, I think, is a really good thing, and it's pretty simple to do if you've got the right tools, obviously. So, but at the same time, I don't really play that much Saturn, so yeah, just because of that, I think it's gonna go in C. Okay, next is the GBA HD made from a Game Boy Advance SP. I love the idea of this project. However, I do not love the fact that it is very DIY. So there's a bunch of different components. You have to buy an FPGA dev board, then you have to solder together a little shield that goes on top of the FPGA board, but those aren't really available for sale. It's an open source project, which means that you can buy all the parts and DIY it yourself. But because of that, and it takes so much time to put that together if you can't buy one from somebody, and even then, the kind of setup how it goes together inside of the case is not really that great either. I mean, it's not bad, it's just very complicated. Go check out my video if you want to see what I'm talking about, but it's very cramped inside of this enclosure. I don't know if I really want to give this a D tier. I do enjoy the project and everything. However, I can't really rate it that highly. It's not necessarily the project itself, the availability of the parts, and just the time-consuming nature of it for the outcome, which nowadays you could buy something like the GB HD Advance from Gamebox if you wanted a consoleizer. So I'll put it in C tier for now, and maybe I'll move it around later. Speaking of the GB HD Advance, this is Gamebox's GBA consoleizer. Now, I will have to say that this mod is not necessarily very beginner friendly. There is a flex cable soldering section, and then you do have to solder just some normal wires. However, the availability of it and just the overall kind of fit and finish and the quality output, I think it's a solid A. Of all the Game Boy consoleizers, it's the only one you can really buy the whole kit. You don't really have to source any of the parts to put it together yourself. So it's definitely more on the intermediate or expert side, but for me, it was still enjoyable. Next is my GameCube that has a GC Dual and a GC loader. Now, I don't have videos for either of these. I actually did this before I started the YouTube channel. From my memory, it's been kind of a long time. The GC loader itself is plug and play. There's no real modding to do there. However, the GC Dual was kind of fun, even though it did involve some case modding. You have to cut a hole in the back to put the HDMI port. I will say that having a GC Dual modded GameCube is a really handy thing to have because it unlocks a bunch of different game options, right? So you've got not just GameCube games, but you've also got the Game Boy Advance games through Game Boy interface. So does a lot of lifting, heavy lifting as far as retro modding goes. So I think it's definitely A tier. Okay, next is my Dreamcast with a clone GDMU and DC HDMI. I have a bunch of nostalgia for this console, not the actual console itself. However, this particular console, because this was the first mod that I remember doing that had a flex cable. So the DC HDMI requires you to solder some flex cables. So that has a lot of nostalgia for me because just I didn't have a lot of experience when I did this. And the GDMU2 is nothing to write home about. So I think I'm gonna put this in just okay B territory. Okay, next is my N64 with an N64 digital. This particular console was my childhood console, so that gives it a few points. I will say that anytime you do a new mod for the first time, that definitely adds, adds to the experience of doing it. However, I had already done a HDMI mod for the N64, the Ultra HDMI. So when I got around to doing the N64 digital, unfortunately my experience was, I don't know, lessened because of that. I do like the mod itself. However, just the experience for me was, not what it could have been. I kind of wish I had done this one before I did the Ultra HDMI. So I'm going to put that in B tier. Next is my N64 that is modded with the N64 RGB from Tim Worthington. Again, this is something that I did before I started my YouTube channel, so there's no video of it. I'm not very fond of this mod. It's kind of similar to the NES RGB. However, it's worse because for the particular model that I had to do, you have to solder those ribbon cables, not flex cables, but ribbon wire cables directly to a DAC chip or some kind of chip on the N64. 99.9% of all the ribbon cables, at least in my experience, I mean, I just think they melt very easily, and it is really difficult to do that well. To make that ribbon cable part that solders directly to that chip, to do that well, takes a lot of skill and time and patience. Otherwise, you could very easily melt a pin or just make it not look great. The mod itself was fine. You get RGB output from your N64. Just the experience on this one is, I don't know. It needs a little bit of an update, a modernization. Next is the NES RGB in a top-loading NES. Now, I think that the NES RGB itself is not a super good mod. Like, it's still challenging and complicated to do well. However, I think it's a mod that everybody should do if you're serious about like starting modding or having a mod collection and you don't have an NES RGB, I think you're missing out on just a big piece of the modding scene, in my opinion. However, I will say that the top loader, I think, has worse output than the front loader, and I think Red Herring, he corroborated that as well. I think the NES RGB mod itself is good, and this is a no-cut mod, meaning that you can get a piece from Laser Bear, whatever that replaces the back of the top loader, so you don't have to damage the case at all. So while the top loader video output isn't so great, I think that it sort of elevates it just because it is such a clean looking system, and NES RGB itself is kind of like a must-do mod. Speaking of NES RGBs, this is the front-loading NES with the NES RGB, and I've included the IGR mod in here as well. The NES RGB part, I don't necessarily know about the IGR part, but the NES RGB in a front loader, that is a mod that's like a must-do mod. Honestly, I think, I'm just gonna put this straight in S tier. The NES RGB on a front loader, there is so many possibilities, right? And even now we're getting new things all the time. So we've got the multi-out from Laser Bear, IGR mods on top of it. That's even built into the NES RGB 4.0, and there's new shells and things, and there's going to be new power boards that kind of enhance the system. I think it's a must-do for anybody who's collecting sort of retro console mods. Next is the Open MVS, which is a consoleization, I guess that's what it is, of a Neo Geo MV1C arcade PCB. This project is awesome. If you're a fan of Neo Geo, I think that this is like the best possible way, well, I guess the cheapest way, if you don't already own an AES, this is the cheapest way that you can have a badass looking console. While getting all the parts is expensive and actually having the enclosure is expensive, to buy the 3D printed enclosure is expensive, I think that it's a really awesome mod, and it makes Neo Geo, pretty accessible. If you don't want to do a super gun, this is the must-do Neo Geo mod. Okay, OpenTendo. Now, I had all the parts to do my OpenTendo for a long time, like over a year. I just didn't get around to it because it's such a daunting build. I don't really know what to say about this other than the project is really awesome. The idea of making a one-to-one reproduction of an NES PCB is a fantastic idea. However, I don't know how many people are truly going to ever experience it just because it takes a lot of effort to get all the parts and everything. So I do love the idea and I love mine, and I can't wait to do all the things that I'm planning to do with it, like a new NES RGB and a new power module. I don't think this is going to be for everyone, so I'm going to put it in C tier. Okay, next is the optimized 3DS capture mod. Now this is the optimized capture mod for the original 3DS, not the new 3DS XL or whatever. I don't know what to say about this one either. This was an experience, and in the end, I have something that is pretty cool. However, its usefulness, I guess it really depends. Like if you're a streamer or something and you just do 3DS, I think that you do have a lot of options that are not actually having a capture mod, like emulation or something. However, knowing the fact that you have a real 3DS and it's connected to your computer to do captures from is a really awesome thought at the end of the day. However, the mod itself, this version of it is not too terrible. However, getting in and out of a 3DS without breaking something itself is a accomplishment. Not the easiest mod, and honestly, I don't necessarily know if I recommend it even to experienced people. This version with the original 3DS, I guess, is okay. I don't think the prices are really super expensive now, but I don't know if I would tell people to do the new 3DS XL mod. I have yet to complete that mod. It's challenging, very challenging. However, I think this one is doable. So if you're interested in 3DS stuff, and you want a capture card basically installed inside of it, definitely not for everybody. I'm only putting it in D tier because of the complexity of it, and it's not necessarily something that you can plug into your TV, which is ironic because currently my 3DS capture mod video has the highest views of any video on my channel. So, okay, Peekaboo. I'll make this one really quick. This is such a simple, such a fun, interesting mod that is made with a Raspberry Pi Pico for $5 or whatever the heck it is. How could you not immediately put this into S tier? This puts GameCube modding to such an accessible place that it's not even funny. There's so many ways that you can install it, recommended or otherwise, and it's only going to get better when they have a firmware update for the wireless version. I think that this is a fantastic mod. As long as they keep making the Raspberry Pi Picos, then this is going to be cool, but definitely a must-do mod. Maybe if you're a beginner, maybe if you're like intermediate, because this is pretty easy. However, I don't want you ruining a whole GameCube if trying to do a mod. So yeah, definitely an awesome mod. Okay, getting to the end now, last row of mods. Now the PS1 Digital is interesting because it was the first digital HDMI mod that Pixel FX released? It's flex cable soldering, so it's kind of challenging. And even then, it's also mixed with the X Station because the X Station I have installed in here. This is a pretty challenging build, all things considered. However, the PS1 has such a great catalog of games, and the convenience of the HDMI mod and the X Station really elevate this PlayStation for me. So I think I'm gonna put it in A tier. If my N64 digital was B tier, this is gonna be like a step above, if only because the PlayStation 1 is better than the N64. Oops, I made a mistake and I forgot to label these. So I have two PlayStations. I actually bought a PSIO way back when. I waited on that like year or something long wait list to get mine. I don't remember the PSIO install. Like you have to install a little chip on the bottom of the PlayStation. I don't remember that being terribly difficult. However, the usefulness of the PSIO now, I guess it's sort of an interesting mod because it plugs into the expansion port on the back. So it's not necessarily like you're losing the disk drive. So, however, I've heard a lot of, I don't know if I would say bad things, but I've heard a lot of drama surrounding the PSIO in the terms of like game compatibility and some other things. I wanted to put it in B tier because it's an interesting idea, and the fact that you get to keep the disk drive is interesting. However, I did have to wait a year, which is sort of annoying. There's just like an aura around the PSIO that I don't really want to touch. Next is the Super Nintendo Junior with Voltar's Super Nintendo Junior RGB Bypass mod. I'll keep this one simple. If you're a fan of the Super Nintendo and you want the highest quality and debatably one of the easiest mods that you can do. This is definitely S tier. It's another one of those must-do mods for new modders. I probably would recommend maybe doing this one first. Well, after you've done a couple of other things, like go change a couple of batteries on some Game Boy games or something, and then maybe you could tackle that. But definitely a must-have mod for anybody's collection. Next is the Ultra HDMI V2. Now, funny story, I was on the group buy for this. I talked about it in my video, but I actually never got it from the group buy, and I don't even know if I got my money back. I'll have to check on that. Jason from Game Tech US actually had it faster than I got it from the group buy, so I was able to buy one from Game Tech US instead of through the group buy, and so that's how I was able to do it. Like I said about the N64 Digital, this mod kind of stole the thunder for me personally from the N64 Digital because it was the first time I had soldered a flex cable inside of an N64. There's some nostalgia or like wow factor, I guess, anytime you do a new mod, at least for me. And this one kind of stole it away from the N64. However, I have no idea if it's going to be supported in the future. Marshall, I think, is the person who developed it. I haven't really heard anything about new firmware or anything. I'll have to check out the website. But yeah, it may be DOA versus I know I'll be able to get firmware updates from PixelFX for the N64 Digital. So maybe it's a C tier. I was going to put it in D, but just the new experience of doing a flex cable in an N64 elevates it a little bit. Next is the Woozle Game Boy Advance Consolizer. So for me, this was the first Game Boy Advance Consolizer that I had done. There's a lot of headaches with this particular build. You do have to solder a lot of wires directly to the Game Boy Advance motherboard, so it does take a lot of time. However, just look at it. It looks really awesome. This was the version that you could get a plexiglass sort of insert for the top. I got mine from Fraggle Rock. He laser etched this and sent it to me. This was the first consolizer that I did, so it really, I'm not gonna say that I'm like known as the consolizer person, but this sparked my interest in consolizers, and this kind of started me getting the GBA HD and the GB HD Advance. So I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it. If you're okay with just using the Game Boy interface, then go that route. However, I just like the look of this consolizer so much that I'm just going to put it on A tier. So I also have the version 2 of the Woozle consolizer. This version does away with soldering all the little wires that you have to solder onto the Game Boy Advance motherboard and replaces it with a flex cable. I don't really know the reason I have both of these. I guess I just wanted to try the experience of the flex cable soldering to the CPU. And I don't really like the enclosure. I know that Laser Bear designed it, but I love the look of the clear top that you can see inside over the only 3D printed version. So definitely gonna go a little below, even though it has the flex cables, so it makes it installing is easier. Overall, I think I like it less. Okay, two more. I have the Xbox HD Plus. This is also the Xbox that has OpenZenium in it because this is a 1.6 Xbox. I have a 1.0 Xbox that has the Xbox HDMI mod in it, and that one is soft modded. So the 1.6 here, I had to do the LPC or whatever it is, that rebuild thing. And that didn't work for me the first time. Before I made the video, I tried another one of those LPC rebuild things. But when I did this video, I got it to work. It's very easy to frag or flashing red and green error an Xbox by doing the LPC rebuild thing. But the rest of the Xbox HD Plus install is relatively easy. I think the flex cable, how you solder the flex cables on this version versus the 1.0 version, I like it better. I think it's because of the console revision and not necessarily Xbox HDMI versus Xbox HD Plus. I think I want to put this in A tier. It's a lot of work to get this install done. However, it's a very satisfying console. The original Xbox I have a lot of nostalgia for. That was the first console that I really did a lot of online gaming. Halo, I played Xbox Live Halo a lot. Definitely love the mod, and I definitely love the system, so it's getting an A. Last but not least is my 1.0 Xbox with the Xbox HDMI. I think I like this console a little bit less. You don't necessarily need a mod chip. You can soft mod to get this to work. Not like that takes the mod down a peg, but you're just installing the Xbox HDMI here. Actually, there's a quick solder thing that I think you have to do in the bottom. I do remember that the flex cable was more complicated for this one. You have to solder it on like 3 different sides of the chip in the corner there. The install itself is easier on the 1.6 Xbox than this version. They basically accomplish the same thing, but just because of the harder install, I'm gonna give this a B. Let me know your thoughts on my retro modding tier list, and click here to watch me install one of those S tier mods, the NES RGB.